And we've started recording. We go live on Facebook. Hello to everybody that are joining us. We're going to give it just a couple of minutes to let more people come in. Looks like people are coming in quite quickly, so hopefully we'll get started here in just a couple of minutes, okay?
I'm getting pretty good at this.
Gonna give it just a couple more minutes. I am going to drop into the chat the link to our YouTube page, which is where you can access previous presentations in this series. So if you're interested, if you haven't managed to take a look yet, that's where you're going to find them. And I am also going to pop into the chat a link to our annual giving page for the History Center. Obviously, these are free presentations just, you know, for the community, but if anyone is interested in giving, we are doing a match up to $50,000. So any donation that you give this month, it'll be doubling your impact. So just ask that you consider it, not a requirement. Let's see. We seem to have stabilized a little bit with the numbers coming in. Might give it a minute more, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Perry's getting all ready to go. All right.
I am.
All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you again for those of you who've just joined us for joining us in this latest presentation in our History of San Diego webinar series. We also want to extend a very special thank you to any of our members who are in the crowd for your support. Like I was just saying a couple minutes ago, if you're interested in our previous presentations, they are available on the History Center's YouTube channel. I've put the link in the chat, and I'll do so again before the end of the webinar so that you can access them there if you'd like. I have just a couple of real quick things to go over. I promise I won't take up too much of your time. We are going to be doing a Q&A at the end of the presentation. Please put your questions in the Q&A function. It's just going to be down at the bottom of your screen in the middle. I will also be monitoring the chat throughout. So if you do ask a question there, don't worry, we will add you to the queue. And then this presentation is also going to be uploaded like all of our previous ones. They usually take a couple of days to go up. So if you have to cut out or something like that, feel free to check it out on the YouTube channel. And then without any further ado, I'm going to hand this over to Barry Goldlust, our presenter.
Okay, once again, this is Barry Goldlust, and for those of you who have attended previous presentations, you know this is going to be the fifth in presentations on the development of San Diego. And this time we'll discuss the expansion of the city out from the core to adjacent areas. From the title, it has mixed themes, and what I want to mention right at the start is that this presentation is focused on the growth of our region and since it's so intertwined with the rail and the railroads arriving in this area, um, we will talk about the railroads as well, but it's not a presentation per se on the history of railroads. It could be long and it could be involved and could be boring, as so many things have happened. So with that uh, introduction, uh, our presentation is brought to you by our San Diego History Center and the Junipero Serra Museum. Hopefully, we will be able to see them in person one of these days. It's been a long road for all of us, and I appreciate your using this opportunity to break up the boredom that you may be suffering from. So let's start out with this presentation, which will cover roughly 50 years plus or minus on either side. It's really hard to confine history to a certain exact year. So roughly 50 years, but we will go on either side maybe as we go along. My comment about not emphasizing the railroad, remember, it's part of the story, a very important part of the story. So here is the map. In the last half of the 1800s, this is development of the Transcontinental Railroad system. And here we are, right here in the corner, tucked away, not attached to any of these rail lines. But if we want to grow our city, we need to. And so that's the story about uh, uh, why we need to connect. And we need to connect because of commerce, because of getting people here in a more direct way and a faster way. So we're dealing with this funny geography. We have these mountains to the west, and we, in order to link up with the railroad, we have to deal with two particular railroads. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go along. Growing the West, we are dealing with a different phenomenon. Growing the East was different. We grew agriculture before we grew towns. Urban frontier refers to the fact that we grew towns before we invested in farms and agriculture. That was the nature of the beast at that time, and it was important that these particular cities were linked to transportation that would be able to carry people and commerce across the country. And so all the successful towns really required land speculation, which wasn't always a good thing, but investments, good investments certainly were a good thing. And railroad development, which had to be part of the deal. San Diego County, let's kind of move back, and we've been focusing so closely, but just a little bit. San Diego County at the time of statehood was much, much larger. It was part of several other counties that are now split off, of course. And now we are right here in San Diego County, maybe 1/8 or so of what it was in statehood. This is 4,200 square miles of county with the population of San Diego County ranking 5th in the nation. So we've talked in the past about these transitions from location to location. In this case, here's the map of Old Town setting back from the bay, and then that transition to Newtown and Alonzo Horton. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about the center city, and then talk about uh, the areas further down southeast. This just to show that we have actually a very large city. We started out with 75 square miles, and we have 343 square miles with a population of 1.3 million people. Everybody has memorized this particular slide, so I won't spend much time. You need people, you need vision, you need money, you need lots of things to get a successful city growing. So our areas under discussion deal with having common the fact that they're contiguous, and that the Transcontinental Railroad link ran through these three areas. And I felt that that was a good way to bring this together, and also to be able to talk about places other than just downtown San Diego. You notice there will be emphasis in red throughout these slides, and when you see that, that refers to something related to the railroads in some way or another, and I will try to point these things out as we go. So the railroad system was important to bring visitors, to bring settlers, to transfer freight back and forth. And it was always, for the freight, certainly a two-way street. The areas we'll talk about: downtown, Horton's Addition, that was the very first neighborhood. Logan Heights, just to the south and southeast, is the second oldest neighborhood in the city. And then National City, which is self-incorporated, started in 1868, just a bit after Alonzo Horton arrived in 1867. The KIMBALLS objective was to make National City a strong competitor for business and commerce and people in this area, competing with San Diego. It's the second oldest city in the county, and eventually it became the terminus for the railroad link to the Transcontinental system. In map form, you can see the center city, the areas we're talking about, Logan Heights, which includes Barrio Logan, and then the National City further south. In search of a railroad. So this wasn't new. Once we achieved statehood, there were many opportunities or seemingly opportunities for having a railroad come to town, but many of them did not prevail. Just to give you an idea of timelines, remember 1850s when the first attempt at developing the downtown occurred. But between the years 1853 and about 1873 or 75, there were 7 potential railroad deals that came and went for one reason or another, but usually because there wasn't enough capital, and some of these businesses really weren't substantial at all. And right in the middle of some of these events came Alonzo Horton, 1867, and he was involved in several of these potential deals that did fall through. Only by 1880 was this area successful in attracting a company that was interested in building a link to the Transcontinental system, and it was a group of people from the Santa Fe Railroad. Just a small number of investors decided that they would, this might be a good deal. And so the California Southern Railroad was set up. And in 1885, the first trains back and forth along this link came and went from San Diego. San Diego population, once again, you've seen this slide, but as a reminder, the main years of growth were in the 1880s, and it's also when a huge peak and then a drop because the railroads left town. And we'll mention that a little bit later on. And the 1890s was just kind of a slow period in terms of population increase, but a busy one in terms of building infrastructure, including local rail lines. People coming to San Diego in the 70s through the 1930s, hugely diverse ethnicity, and all for the same reasons and different reasons. They came to help build, help have a better life, and some extenuating circumstances caused one group to become less important and another group more important as time went on. But all these groups are still well represented in the area. Okay, we look at San Diego Center City, and this is taken from a defunct corporation that was set up, Center City Development Corporation, to look at the heritage and how to preserve the heritage of the Black community. And so this blue line is meant to indicate the boundaries of this particular study. But in fact, there wasn't that large a population early on of Black individuals, but these were this area was where they had businesses from one place to another. They lived in some places, for example, in this area up near Ash Street, down to maybe Market, thereabouts. But this was the area where just about all these ethnic groups ended up. Whatever they were there for, they ended up downtown. And there were two reasons for that. This is where mainly things were being built, and this is the core of the growth of San Diego. And secondly, there were covenants. There were areas in the city that would not rent, would not sell property to various of these groups. And so they were clustered down in this area. This area is what was known as Chinatown, 2nd Street to 6th and Market to J or thereabouts. And this is the gas lamp district, just for reference purposes. And this area down here by the 30s was by far, maybe even earlier than the 30s, the most diverse part of the city. So in time, people started to maybe gain some economic security and started moving out of the downtown, which was considered rather seedy, and they looked for better places. So they moved out east and down, which leads us to Logan Heights. Logan Heights is really the next section just below Center City, and the it was logical that this would be one of the areas, not the only area, but one of the areas where people would migrate from downtown when they had the opportunity. So what was Logan Heights like? Well, up until the 1820s, clearly indigenous peoples lived in the area. And even later in the 1800s, there were still these rancherías where the indigenous people lived. But the real activity started, well, in a sense, in the 60s, 1860s and 70s, when subdivisions appeared. The subdivisions basically people who invested in parcels of land with the objective of making these centers of population and selling the land to settlers. So what we have, a couple of examples. Sherman's Addition actually was right on the border, just north of uh, the Logan Heights, and just contiguous with the downtown area. And this Manasseh and Schiller addition became actually one of the most important ones in the early going and growth of Logan Heights. There were two railroads that had land. They were either offered or given subsidies. Those two groups never panned out, and even the other subdivisions, well, they would sell property or try to sell property. Very little development. That's the bottom line. Very little development occurred 60s, 70s, even into the 80s. But once again, here are some of impact of railroads coming and going. Logan Heights does grow, and it starts growing once the Transcontinental tracks are open. And there is an offshoot from that the investors who came from the Santa Fe group put in place. And this was an investment group, land investment, called the San Diego Land and Town Company. And this group had a very important impact on the real estate market and other areas of interest in both Logan Heights and down in National City in particular. The Logan Heights had really slow growth from the 80s to the early 1900s. The population is really small, maybe a couple hundred. It's really hard to get an idea. But some people who did obtain economic security did visit, did settle in this area. Some built substantial homes, others more modest homes, and many Blacks and other ethnic groups did move into this area. But as I said, the numbers were not very large, but a city was beginning to, or another kind of core, if you will, our neighborhood was beginning to grow. During this period of time, local rail, and we've kind of talked mostly about linkage to the Intercontinental Railroad, but this issue of having local rail was very important because it allowed people to get from one area of the city to another and allowed them to live in places other than downtown, and then they would be able to come downtown as needed. So it expanded their their life and their geography a great deal. And then in 1905, this area becomes known as Logan Heights. So brief mention about why. Senator John Logan is actually a general in the Union Army. He was in Congress before the Civil War. He was in Congress after the Civil War. He was a proponent of Black rights. He was not well liked by the opposition. He was one of the things that he did was he was the one that first suggested Decoration Day, which we know as Memorial Day. And he never lived here. He was raised in Illinois, and it appears that he was so well liked. One other thing, in addition, he did vote for legislation that helped um, uh, potentially bring a railroad here, the Texas and Pacific, which in the early 1870s drew a lot of interest. Unfortunately, that never happened. But because of all this activity, in the 1880s, a street was named after Logan. And then finally in 1905, this area became known as Logan Heights in his honor. Um, I guess that's the long and the short of that story. Logan Heights continues to grow. And we mentioned once before, this Sprickles San Diego and Arizona Railway. It was a railway that potentially was a link between San Diego and the East. And it was called the Impossible Railroad. It's a huge story in itself. It's an incredible story, actually. It will go down and is in history, recorded history, that this was quite an undertaking. It took about 12 years to build, and it wound its way from Logan Heights, 28th Street was the start of it, down through Mexico, Tijuana, back up into the United States at Tecate, and parts of this rail are actually still functioning as freight. Many other things happened in the next years. A lot of coastal landfill, which changed the topography and altered the kind of commerce that occurred. The military came. First tuna factory appeared in Logan Heights, called Pacific Tuna Company. And in 1920, as a reflection on the fact that a huge influx of Mexicans, largely because of the Mexican Revolution, came to this area. And it was at that point referred to as Barrio Logan, Barrio simply meaning neighborhood. Logan Heights early on. Let's talk about some of the things that were there. Benson Lumber, a company that was started by a gentleman who lived up in Oregon, would send huge amounts of lumber down to this area. Have a photo to show you about that as well. Very important company. Bayview Park was the first intercity baseball park, and it was then eventually replaced by another place called Athletic Park. The Armory, which was located in this direction off, I believe that was National Avenue, was also a recreation and public center. 28th Street Pier, which saw very little commerce, became an aquatic center, as well as a recreation center. And here you can see the railroad tracks for the Santa Fe Railroad going up towards Center City. And note here, early Black neighborhood. This is, in terms of numbers, not huge, but there was a distinct neighborhood here uh, uh, to the east part. As I mentioned before, this area was called East End until 1905 when it was renamed Logan Heights. And last but not least, the first brewery in the county, Dobler's Brewery. Okay, although this is fast forward to 1983, we're going to talk about some of the early events in the early 1900s. This is the landfill that I referred to. It goes all the way up to the area that we now call our airport. And it changed the landscape, provided a place for the growth of the naval base, which eventually became known as the 32nd Street Naval Station, which was begun in 1919. Here's the Santa Fe Railroad tracks. And you can see a lot of the newer things as well, including Chicano Park, to give you just an idea of where things are. But this is very important. I mentioned the National City and Otay Railroad, which was actually, it's not on this map, but it should be, and it ran somewhere in this vicinity all the way down to the border. So this was a major change in the topography and the commerce of the area. Yes, the Chicken of the Sea, tuna factory with this young lady and her tuna. The lumber company, Benson Lumber Company, is a large view of the facilities, very large place appears. And these are rafts that Mr. Benson created in 1906. They were huge. These are long logs that were chained together. Some of them as much as 1,000 feet long and capable of holding enough lumber for perhaps 200, 250 average size homes. It took about 2 weeks to bring one of these rafts down the coast from Oregon to Logan Heights. East End, 1904, pretty sparse. This is the Spreckles Electric Railway. And it's important to remember that even though there wasn't much growth in population during the 1890s, there were those local rail lines, especially this electric rail line. Spreckles was showing a lot of diligence in growing and spreading this rail line throughout the city. This is a picture of the baseball team that won championship in 1907 called the Pickwicks. So our final link to the railroad, if you will, is a national city. And I kind of use this phrase, for rancho to city, the name's the same. Well, the Rancho de la Nación was a rancho that was owned by the last mayor or governor of the area, Mexican governor. His name was Pio Pico, and Pio Pico was sold this land to his, or gave his land to his son-in-law, who eventually ended up going through some other hands and into the hands of the family of Frank Kimball. So this is Rancho de la Nation. They kept the name and just converted it to National Ranch. And you'll hear National Ranch and National City. National City is an area within National Ranch. And National Ranch gave rise to part of Chula Vista and Bonita. The size was about 26,000 acres. The famous Kimball family, they arrived in 1968, 1 year after Alonzo Horton does. This is Frank and his wife Sarah, Warren, another brother, and wife Flora, who we'll talk a little bit about later. George and his wife Lucy, and another brother Levi, who was one of the partners in buying the National Ranch. As we did with Alonzo Horton, there's just a long list of things that these people did. And a lot of it was just hands-on. This was a very industrious family and led by Frank, who was just amazing. They knew construction, and they got into all kinds of businesses. And in his attempt, of course, to compete with National City, started very early on. Then just 1 year later, competing with Alonzo Horton in San Diego for land for the Memphis and El Paso Railroad. That deal did not happen. Another deal in 1872, the Texas Pacific, that didn't happen. Third time as a charm, 1879, when the California Southern Railroad came into being, and we've referred to that when we're talking about Logan Heights. But important to know that when each of these events occurred, there were these booms, investors, speculators came to town, people wanted to settle, and then they lost money, they had to leave town, or they were stuck there high and dry and without any money. And one of the things that Frank did, which Alonzo Horton was also good at, was supporting the people in his area. And so when these people were stuck without a job, he offered them jobs, such as building roads, and he would pay them for this here, and he was really quite generous, so generous that he was destitute by the time the 1890s came along, but he was able to recover some wealth and was able to literally move back into a house that that he had to leave. We'll show some photos of some of these other activities. So the link is finally here to the Transcontinental system, the California Southern, later the Santa Fe, in 1885. The largest they had the largest rail yards in the country. Well, National City keeps building, and the Kimballs are going to keep involved in it. And we get to the point where we can talk a little bit more about this Land and Town Company. They were not only an investor in land for people to come buy and live, they were interested in doing some other things. So two of their other projects, along with Frank Kimball, were as follows. One, in 1887, the National City and Otay Railroad, the railroad that we talked about, the one that came from the border, Mexico, all the way up to San Diego. It was rather important. It happened at a time when people were really quite positive about living in San Diego, even though the railroad left in 1888. Nevertheless, the infrastructure was there, and this railroad was important in moving people from one area to the other. The other event, which was really quite interesting, is investment in a dam. This Sweetwater Dam was completed in 1888. There's a big story behind that, which we won't go into right now, but this dam was the largest dam in the county. In fact, it was the second dam in the county, the first one being Mission Dam, the one up in Mission Trails Regional Park. The third thing that I won't get into at all, but the Land and Town Company was involved in the development, the early years of Chula Vista. So how did Frank Kimball and his family and National City do compared to San Diego, just looking at population? Well, San Diego was founded in 1834, and even though at that point we talked about a few hundred people, that was a few hundred more than Frank started with. The first census, 1880, there were only 248 people. He arrived in 1868, so we use that kind of as a starting date. As you can see, the population never caught up by a long shot. It was never important in terms of population. But I need to say that what was important was that Frank was able to bring a lot of notoriety to the San Diego area because he was involved in so many different things, including horticulture. So this is a olive fields, and Frank was deeply involved in growing olives, and he was one of the major growers of olives and eventually olive oil in this area, and of citrus fruits, and used the railroad to take his produce countrywide. And so from that standpoint, he was acting pretty much like the Chamber of Commerce, and he had the goods with him. So he performed an invaluable function for this particular area. This is the wharf that the Kimballs built. This was the sheep sheep herding that business that he was involved in, and an early lumber company. I don't know if that was related to the company that the Kimballs actually had owned. Olive wood, Warren's masterpiece to his wife Flora. The grounds were filled with ornamental trees and fruits and vegetables. Amazing place. Here's Frank as well. This does not have a date on this photo. And this is Warren's gift posthumously to his wife Flora, the olive wood clubhouse. The olive wood clubhouse still exists. It's boarded up. It lacks financial support, but it still exists down at National City. Flora was important. She was a suffragist. She was a great educator. She was the first woman who was elected to a board of education in the state, and first one to provide free kindergarten to children. This was not a Kimball property. This was the Italian National Macaroni Company, and it exploded one day. And this is a what it looked like after the explosion have no other history. Another building that was built by somebody other than the KIMBALLS was this Paradise Valley Hospital and Sanitarium. I believe on that site now there is actually a hospital of, I've never seen it, but I've been told that there is a structure there. And this is the electric railway coming down the center of National Avenue in National City. So that's a whirlwind tour from the center of the city down to National City. And it's a really interesting story, starting with 75 square miles. The city of San Diego is now almost 4 or 5 times as large, and has grown from a population of 500 to probably closer to 1.5 million people now. So the question is, how do you visualize the future? And when I ask that question, you need to think about many things, but one in particular: you need water. Is there a limitation to the population growth depending on how much water is available? Well, remember that big Sweetwater Dam that they built? Well, by 1904, they were several years into a drought, and they really couldn't get water to this area. And so this former Captain Moore dug a well. He found some decent tasting water. He bought a oak barrel from a local winery and sold the water door to door in National City. So funny way to end a presentation, but a great way to segue into our next presentation, which will look at, for the first time, really deeply into infrastructure. And that infrastructure is about the water development in San Diego County. It happens to be my favorite topic. It is so fascinating, and we will cover lots of information. And if you haven't heard the story, stay tuned and please join us on Tuesday, January 12th. So with that, I will thank you for your patience, and we can start answering some questions.
Thank you, Barry. Thanks to everyone who joined us for the presentation. We do have several questions already, so just going to go ahead and get started. Okay. From Marilyn Riley in the chat, I have a question asking who were Logan and Sherman.
Okay, Logan was a general that but he was a congressman and a senator around that time. He was a general in the Union Army. He was a supporter of Black rights and a supporter of the local railroad link here. And that is why they decided to name the street and then the neighborhood Logan Heights. And who is the other one you mentioned?
Sherman.
Oh, Matthew Sherman. He's claimed to be the first full-time resident in Newtown, and was obviously a land investor because he did, as you saw, the Sherman addition, which now may be part of Golden Hills.
All right. The next question is also from Marilyn Riley. Why did the landfill occur? Surely there was room for development without the fill.
Why did the landfill occur? There probably were several reasons. One of them for sure is that the bay was silting up. I mean, that had been a problem for hundreds of years, and so they have dredged the bay on more than one occasion, and in this time they were able to fill in quite an extensive length of shore. There were mud flats along the bay, and that was all covered up, and so mainly it was just practical that the bay they needed to keep the bay open and you know, allow larger ships to get in.
The next question is from Jeremy Ogle. Why were the streets of Logan Heights laid out on a diagonal?
The rationale for that was that in Logan Heights, the land kind of slopes from a hill down to the bay, and it was a way to align the buildings so that people would get a better view of the bay. In those days, they could see the bay. I don't think they can now.
All right. The next question is also from Marilyn Riley. She says, I am a 75-year-old San Diego native, and I have never heard the name Barrio Logan until probably the 80s. We always called the area Logan Heights. Was this just ignorance on our part?
Well, you're not alone. I know that there are several other people that were surprised to find out that the name appeared as early as 1920. And as I mentioned, it was spurred on because of the large influx of Mexicans.
All right, next question is from Mark Thompson. Is there a good source for additional information on the Electric Railroad?
I can't quote you offhand, but yes, there are several references out there. If you want us to hunt those up for you, be glad to just send your email address, and we'll try to find some for you.
The next question is from Linda Durr. You showed a pier. I can't remember the name. I'm assuming it is gone. Do you know what is there now?
Where?
I think you showed a pier earlier when we were, if you can scroll back a little bit and we'll see if we can find it.
You're talking about one of our slides that had a picture?
I think it might have been the map with the 28th Street Pier. It was one of the last slides.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so what is the question now?
She is assuming the pier is gone, and she's wondering if you know what's kind of in that area now.
Well, just by the looks of this and this one, I believe it's probably under landfill. I think that's probably right.
And I believe that's at least part of the Navy shipyards right there too, correct?
Yep, that's right.
So there probably is a pier that's in the general area where the 28th Street Pier used to be, but slightly different uses for it nowadays. Mm-hmm. Let's see. The next question is from Thomas. Can't recall if you mentioned it, but from where did the KIMBALLS originate?
I did not mention it. They were all born in New Hampshire. And they actually migrated to San Francisco before they came here.
it's a long journey. The next question is from Robert Petty. He asks, were solicitations sent out around the county for new residents for National City? And if so, were these sent to any particular region?
I didn't catch the first part of that.
Were solicitations sent out around the county for new residents for National City? And if so, were they sent out to any place in particular?
I have no information on that.
That is fair. Let's see. Barbara Friedrich has posted in the chat that Phil Pride has several editions of the geography of the San Diego region. Pride has chapters on transportation and water resources of the region. So if someone were looking for any sort of further information about what was presented in this presentation, they might be able to find it there. I did see that Mark Thompson, who had asked the previous question, did submit his email, so I can copy and paste that and send it on to you. Let's see. Next question is from Joshua, who is currently in charge of the Olivewood Club, and why is there no funding behind it if it is a historic site?
Because it is by donation. There are other buildings that are considered historic that have no financial support. In fact, one of the early lecturers who talked Diego City office
Looks like things might be freezing up a little bit. I was seeing a bit of a freeze there. I'm not sure. Hopefully it was fine for everybody else. Let's see. There's some really helpful links and some interesting links that are right now in the question and answer, the Q&A portion. So if anybody wanted to check them out, some of them include good information on the Black-owned Douglas Hotel in downtown San Diego. Another question from Carol. Do you have any information on E. Darwin French, who was elected to the county supervisors in 1869, then president of the board in 1870s? Or maybe some photos. He was my great-grandfather.
I'm afraid not.
It is possible, Carol, that there might be some information in our research archives. I would suggest that you contact them at collections@sandiegohistory.org. And I'll go ahead and type the answer out to you as well, so you have that email address. Please note, though, that there is that they are taking a bit of a break for the holidays, and that they won't be answering research requests until the 7th of January. But if you just send it in, then they'll have it when they start answering research requests. So I think looking over things, that there are no questions. It looks like there have been some problems with the links, so I'm resending them right now. Let's see. Marilyn Riley was asking if anyone could recommend any novels set in early San Diego. Maybe Barry, you've read something?
How early in San Diego? So you go back to Richard Henry Dana in two years before the mast, and that has a nice chapter on the Hyde houses in La Playa, and what life was like for a year in Dana's life.
Well, that sounds like a good place to get started, and I think it's quite a famous book. I know
Yes.
that we've had people come into the History Center asking about it. So.
Yeah, there's also Ramona, which is a fiction based on some reality by Helen Hunt Jackson. I'm sure there are others.
That is also something that you might want to check out on our website. It's entirely possible that we might have some copies in our research library, because we have a lot of things that are San Diego related in there. So you might want to maybe just do a Google search there, or send an email also out to the collections at email to see if somebody might be able to recommend something there. So the last question that we are going to answer today is from Veronica Enrique, and she was asking how we register for January's presentation. Generally speaking, we send out an email blast. It should come out in the next few weeks or so, and that will be, you'll be able to find the registration links there. We don't have them created just yet, but once the email blast goes out, you should see it there. It'll also be available on the events page on our website. So if you just go sandiegohistory.org and click on events, it should just be on the calendar for January within the next couple of weeks once we create that link. And again, feel free, you can definitely go ahead and, register just as soon as that link goes up, all the way up until like the 5 minutes before the presentation. So lots of time to register. Okay, so I think that's all the time that we're going to have for today. So the next presentation will be January 12th at noon. And same time, same place. Hopefully I will be seeing most of you guys there. Please visit our website, www.sandiegohistory.org, for more information, or if you'd like to support the History Center with a donation. And thank you guys for attending. I appreciate that you all came out virtually to check out this presentation, and we'll see you next time.
Happy New Year, everybody. Thank you for joining us.